If there were a place in the world where you could store and protect the truth, it might be deep in the Rockies, in a field, on a ranch, in a silo, where an American patriot tells you what keeps him awake at night. Now, here is Medal of Honor recipient Drew Dix and words from the Silo.
Welcome, folks, to episode number 8 of Words from the Silo. You know, the last episode that we had, in fact, the last couple, we drilled down on the pushback on DEI, and the very last one was more specifically about females in the military, and then we did the one on draft versus the volunteer military. And I got to thinking, you know, it's about time to do one on leadership. Mm-hmm. And that's what leadership is. Leadership is the art in convincing someone to do something they really don't want to do. And let's face it, war fighting is something that a lot of people don't want to do. Even the warriors out there, when it comes right down to it, you get a little, I'll tell you from experience, you get a little antsy about it. Whether it's probably not, maybe not fear, but it's the unknown, and the unknown is what is curious to the mind, and the real warrior wants to be successful above all. And I remember the first time that I went into definite known combat, where I was nervous, but more nervous about how I was going to appear to those indigenous troops under me. Whether was I going to measure up, but everything fell into place right away. But now we're talking about what does it take to become a warrior. I wasn't a warrior as soon as I put the uniform on, raised my right hand. You develop that warrior ethos through those that you work for and are associated with. And one of those that I was associated with that was very instrumental in my life, hey Betty, is the gunfighter, Lieutenant General Hank Emerson. He was, when I first met him, he was a brigadier general and was assigned to Special Forces in a transition phase towards the end of the Vietnam War. Hank was a wonderful, wonderful man. And I can just now say Hank. Brad, I know you met him on his place in East Helena on Canyon Ferry Lake. We had a great time doing a little pheasant hunting and getting to know him and a little bit about me. I guess you were doing that Beyond the Metal.
Fadeaway Ranch.
Yeah.
Fadeaway Ranch, I remember that.
Fadeaway, yeah. You know, I'd like to just tell our listeners, viewers, that if you've been in the military, there's a good chance you knew the gunfighter or heard of him. If you were a West Pointer, and he was, class of 48, you definitely have heard of the gunfighter. He was absolutely the most unique individual that military officer that I've ever met. And my wife, Patricia, who didn't really spend a lot of time around the military, none at all, actually, first met Hank, and she was amazed at the character of that individual. Yeah. She just, it was just something that he had a way of inspiring people, that mainly people, a lot of them that didn't know anything about the military, which is something that we need to do more of this day and age, is educate the public on what it takes to be in the military. Not everybody can do it. So before we get into it, and I'm going to get into Hank, from the last show that we did, you had a couple questions, I know.
Yeah, a couple of interesting questions came up for the females in the military episode we did. Pointed at that there are exceptional women that are in the military, and so a little bit of questioning of our take on it. I thought you might be able to clear that up with that there are women that are exceptional and can do things that men can do.
You mean physical? You're talking about physical.
I'm talking about
things,
physical. Yeah, absolutely.
So let me just ask you first, who did you get that from, or what was the relationship?
Well, that one particular question came from a family member of a warrior, of a woman warrior.
Okay. Well, here's the way I answer that one. This is a common sense program, and I agree there are some females that are absolutely stronger physically than some males. And it's pretty rare, but I also heard family members talk about their daughter being in the military, and they can do anything that any man can do. Okay, I get that. But let's get back to the very basic facts. If we get into a big war, and let's face it, the only reason why we have military is to fight our wars, defend our country. If we get in a big one, we're going to have a draft. And if we draft, let's say we need 5 million men and women, they're going to have to address that we're going to have women in the draft if they're going to be equal. And then we try to draft 2 or 3 million women based on the exceptional ability of that one rare individual that their parent or grandparent loves. What are we going to get? 2 or 3 million exceptional people? No. My guess is we're going to have a cross-section of our population. And not only, I think it'd be tough to find 2 or 3 million physically strong women that could compete with any man. We're not finding it in women's sports yet. I don't think we have convinced the country, mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers of these women that want them in combat. So we cannot do it. I totally respect a person's opinion on the capability of someone they know very well. In fact, I've talked to someone recently who also expressed that kind of respect for their daughter. And I said, well, would you want her to be captured? What is going to happen to her? And the look on their face was like, well, we didn't think of that. Mm-hmm. You got to think of it, ladies and gentlemen. This is serious. War fighting, serious business.
Do you feel as though in a volunteer military, we have a ability to get more exceptional women than we do in a draft where it is a random draft? So in other words, they would probably change the rules of drafting and only draft men?
Well, if we don't draft and we don't have to get to that scenario and we have volunteers and we have the ability to get the very best women, that'd be fine. But we can't do it based on what someone says. They have to compete with the men on an equal basis with their the physical fitness. I think we're getting to that point now. Ironically, maybe that's not even the right word, but the Department of Defense has established new physical fitness, combat fitness for the Army that I know of. And I'm already hearing pushback from those who say, well, that's not fair to the women. Or what's not fair about it? Right. The requirements are not helping a woman's stature. In other words, some of the events. Well, the events were designed not to exclude women, but to get the best all-around individual to be able to carry ammunition, run up a hill, carry their wounded buddy off the battlefield.
Yeah. Do you feel as though women would have an opt-out option in a draft? Would there be more abilities to opt out in a draft?
Well, the opting out, I don't know. We're getting in a program that's more political because it will be totally political.
It just interests me on what would happen if there was a draft.
There could be no opt-out stuff. We're going to have a big problem just fielding 4 or 5 million healthy men.
Do you think the criteria in non-draft time is higher, like the push-ups and the weight and what you can do now than if there's a draft? Do they lower kind of because they need so many people quickly?
Well, no, I think the basic combat fitness, first of all, when you have a draft and you got, in theory, some people don't want to be drafted, you got to figure out a way to make sure that they don't just fail the PT test so they can't get drafted.
Okay.
I mean, so I was in the basic training. I wasn't a draftee. I was 17. I joined, but we did have draftees, and they did the same. They did a regular PT test, and in fact, they didn't have to have it to enter the Army. It was a standard that the basic training unit established that this was the goal. But now that's different than if you went into airborne training. The PT is a little bit higher. You go into Rangers, it's a little higher. You go into Special Forces or some of the other special ops, it's higher for that particular occupation.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Brad? I mean, you haven't spent any time in the military. What do you think? Would you want to be drafted? Let's say push you back about 25 years.
I don't know if anybody wants to be drafted.
No.
And you know, it's a special breed of human being that does what you guys do, you warriors, and I have a ultimate respect for that. I think what I've learned as just even being around you for 25 years, my mindset has changed a little bit, you know, and I kind of envy what warriors have done and the commitment to service. So, you know, yeah, looking back, maybe I would have liked to have done it, you know.
Well, so there's two sides of that. An 18-year-old, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old that gets drafted, if they haven't been around the military, they really don't know what it's all about. But in the days of the draft, those young guys that were drafted that had family members that fought in Korea and World War II, the deal is they don't want to shame them by not doing well.
Not doing it.
And that's kind of the warrior ethos. It's not that you're automatically a warrior, but you carry that on, that you want to not shame your family or your blood kin, to fail something like that. And it was an obligation in those days. Now I'm not too sure if the average citizen feels like it's an obligation.
Well, you know, that's similar in a lot of occupations. Like when I was talking to the police chiefs, we did a little thing with them, and you know, their dad was in the police and their grandpa was in the police, and you know, they kind of follow that line. So there's a lot of that. I can see that, and maybe, you know, we've been in combat for all these different generations in some way or form, so we should be still breeding that forward. You would think, but I don't know.
Well, it's pride, and every individual wants to be accepted. I guess everyone. Even if you're a gang member or a gangbanger, you want to be accepted in your group.
Yeah.
I'm not comparing gangs with the military, but it is an obligation that you have that you put on yourself to be accepted. So, but anyway, I think that's
our listeners are going to hear Ben here thinking that's me breathing in the mic.
But Ben's my buddy. He's been with me a lot. So anyway, Ben, why don't you?
Well, hey, so let's talk about the Gunfighter.
You bet.
I want to, before you even get started, maybe you're going to talk about this, but where did he get that nickname?
Well, let me tell you. Let me get back. Hank Emerson, when I first met him, was a brigadier general. Already had a reputation of being a fighter, a warrior. He had 2 Distinguished Service Crosses.
Wow.
One in Korea and one in Vietnam. And I don't know too much about his Korea experience, but he had a very, very solid reputation of being a warfighter.
And for our listeners, the Distinguished Service Cross is the second highest award you can earn in combat, right below the Medal in the Army, right below the Medal of Honor.
Right, and the Navy Cross is the Navy, and Air Force Cross for the Air Force. Incidentally, the criteria for the second highest award is basically the same as for a Medal of Honor in a lot of cases. It's just that the witnesses can't be totally, without a doubt, verified. And that rule came out in 1917 when they established the Pyramid of Honor. And before that, there was only one. There was the Medal of Honor. There was the only one. So a lot of individuals in the early times received a Medal of Honor for an action maybe less than what the criteria would be now.
I see.
But anyway, Hank had 2 Distinguished Service Cross. And one time, and he asked me to be his aide one time, and I really didn't. After I received a battlefield commission, he looked me up and was assigned to Special Forces, and he had no Special Forces training or background. He was a conventional guy, and he wanted an aide that knew Special Forces so I could help him out in understanding what that's all about. And I never, it's really awkward when you're a young, brand new first lieutenant, soon to be captain, to be respected like that from a guy like General Hank Emerson, the gunfighter. He absolutely admired battlefield heroism. And from all of the guys that worked for him, that served under him, and those that served alongside of him, he had that I don't know, he was definitely a warrior, because if you had it on your chest, you were part of the group.
Yeah.
And there was no question about it. But the gunfighter, where he got that nickname, when he was in Vietnam, when he was a brigade commander. This is after another previous tour, and now he's a colonel, full colonel, and he had the reputation of being there for his troops on the ground, and if they needed help, he'd land that helicopter, and the word is he landed that helicopter, and of course he didn't have his M16 or long rifle. He had his .45, and he killed a couple enemy soldiers rushing the helicopter and saved the day there. But he was helping evacuate badly wounded people. Now this is a commander up in the air that is in the safety of the air and went into the battle, came out blazing away, and so he got the nickname Gunfighter.
Well, that's a good nickname.
Yeah,
you met him. Appropriate nickname.
It's an appropriate one. You met him. And,
I have met him. He was a interesting man.
Yeah. I can. We're talking about leadership style. So Hank, I can just now call him Hank. When we were together, just one-on-one, hunting or traveling or whatever, he always said, "Well, you can call me Hank," and I said, I just never felt. I always call him General or something, and but now here we are talking about Hank, the gunfighter, and he's looking down on us probably, but he was a guy that he loved those soldiers, and when I came back from Vietnam, I came back first time in 69, and then went back in 70, came back 71. The war was winding down. Racial tensions in the military was as bad as I've ever seen it. It was incredible. It was, the civil rights movement was in the 60s, right? And so the war came on, and now we're in the 70s, war's over, and So there's still some moving around in the culture, and it carried over into the military. So when he took over the 18th Airborne Corps at Fort Bragg, we just ended the draft in '73. We're dependent on, and we got a lot of draftees still in. But I've talked about the streets on Fort Bragg were dangerous, gangs running around. It was tough. Hank's going to solve this problem, and he did. First thing he did was he found this black colonel named Colin Powell, and he said, Colonel Powell, I want you to take the 18th Airborne Corps Support Command, where a lot of the African American soldiers were, and I want you to fix it. And he said, yes, sir, I'll do it. And in a short period of time, Colonel Powell, and there are a lot of people, our listeners will know who Colonel Powell became, 4-star general, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the Secretary of State.
Yep.
And but anyway, we fixed it. We started fixing it. Got a handle on it right away. And I remember being an aide, I'm watching this, everything. He believed in, if we can get these people of all races together with the one mission of war fighting, we're going to solve this racial problem. And he had some of our listeners are going to probably have a different reaction when I say he started a pro-life program. It's got nothing to do with abortions or anything, but it's pro-life. In other words, you live your life to the fullest, whatever culture you have, but the number one culture is the war-fighting mission. Mm-hmm. And Hank got in there, and he said, he was a smart man. He said, one thing, and I'm the aide now, he's not confiding in me, but he had me in all these discussions, and he'd ask me what I think. He was that kind of a guy, but he said, you know what every culture has that is unique to their culture? Well, you know that, Brad. You got a band, right? Music.
Okay. So
he said, we're going to have a sing-in. Some of these old guys would know, a sing-in. What are we going to do? No, he said, we're going to have this whole weekend. He got the number one entertainers in the Latin music, the soul music, country western, rock, and invited them to Fort Bragg at I think it was Towel Stadium, the big field in the 82nd Airborne area. And it started on a Friday afternoon after work, after duty hours, and it was going to go right on through into Sunday. And he said everybody is going to be there. That's risky when you have pushing maybe 20,000 troops that might have some different, because we're finishing up these little racial confrontations. And he said he got up there, and I'll tell you what, he did not sleep and didn't leave until Sunday. Of course, his aide was there too. And but that's where I met Conway Twitty and Loretta Lynn and Charlie Pride and all of them. And that's the countryside. But he introduced every one of them. And when he got up there and they had a Latin band, they had mariachis and all that stuff, he would introduce them, and people, yeah, you could hear it rumble out there. But before it was over, they were dancing and raising hell with everybody's songs.
Yeah.
He knew what to do. And then he'd always finish it up, and he says, all right, now, you don't have to love each other's music. You don't have to give up your culture for somebody else's. But you're going to bring everybody into this culture of ours, and that is this war-fighting culture. We're going to play hard, and we're going to work hard. Mm-hmm. And but we're going to all bleed red if we have to bleed. And the troops loved him for that. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
Pro-life.
Yeah, it's a great story on the spin on the word there, and the music though, how it brings people together.
It does. And another thing, he was unconventional, even though he was a very conventional commander as far as in the conventional military, but unconventional in leadership style. He used a term, and General Hollingsworth, he was a wonderful man. He was a gunfighter's mentor. Had 3 Distinguished Service Crosses. I used to pheasant hunt with the 2 of them, and between them 5 Distinguished Service Crosses.
Wow.
But they called affectionately now the little guy, which, if you think about it, he didn't care much about the officers and the whatever. It's the little guys that we got to look out for. Mm-hmm. And they were fierce about protecting the respect of the little guy. And you might think that's belittling them. It's making them feel, like down here. No. In that world, and in the context that I'm saying it, he believed in the little guy.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, after he left the Army, Brad, and at his place in Canyon Ferry Lake, I spent a lot of time there, maybe a month at a time, on several occasions. And not one night went by when he didn't get a call from a little guy. From way back in the Korean War, early days in Vietnam, and some not in the war time. Every night he got at least one.
Yeah.
And he'd be on the phone with them 30, 40 minutes to an hour, talking to them.
He had impact beyond even men he served with or led, because even like a guy like that worked for me that admired him. I had the Army enlisted John, if you remember.
Yeah, John Scheimer.
Yep, and he had ultimate respect for a gunfighter. And when we were going to go travel there to film that segment, John was, oh man, this guy's the greatest, And so he had impact even on soldiers after he was at Fadeaway, basically.
Yeah, well, those guys like that never forget someone that they admire, and that's what leadership is. And I think we've lost some of that. There's a leadership style out there that some people believe that you got to keep giving troops time off. You got to keep making life softer for them. No, the troops don't want that. Yeah. They want bragging rights about how tough it was and that their leader looked out for them and they were the best unit in the United States military.
Yep.
That's what he inspired. And so I'm proud to be able to talk about Hank after, he's gone. And, he called me, I would say 2 weeks before he passed, and said, well, Drew, I hadn't talked to you in a while, and I hadn't. I was busy doing some stuff, and I regretted that a little bit. But he said, when I pass, you're in the script. And what that meant was I was a pallbearer and also to speak at the funeral in Arlington. And I was proud to be a pallbearer with some very famous individuals. Colin Powell walked right behind me carrying that casket.
Well, I know he was highly respected, and I know he respected the Medal of Honor.
Oh, yeah.
And he had a lot of respect for you.
Well,
I brought up this picture here. This is your buddy
and,
here.
The one where you can see the lake in the background, that's Fadeaway Ranch.
Well, I was fortunate enough to shoot a long-form interview with him, and maybe we'll be able to run some of those clips during this episode a little bit, just so our listeners can get a taste of Hank out of his own mouth.
Yeah. Well, that'll be really special for our viewers and our listeners. Hank, when he was in Korea, now I wasn't there with him, but I'd heard about this, where he'd get up in front of he'd get the whole division together. There's 20,000 folks in a division. roughly, and get in front of them and tell them we're gonna. And they were real close to the rocks, the Korean Army, and they'd say if those so and so's even stick their nose over here, we're gonna run their ass all the way back to China. And of course, that didn't go over too well politically, but I don't think Hank cared too much about that. But he inspired those Koreans too. I mean,
he wasn't a general in Korea. He was still like a colonel in Korea.
No, he was a major general. He was in when he was in Korea. He was in commander of the 2nd Infantry.
Okay.
Division, 20,000. That's after he was a Special Forces leader in Special Forces, and this is probably another segment, but he came there as the leader of Special Forces, and a lot of the old SF guys were curious, why would a non-Special Forces general officer take it over? And this is years ago, we had one general officer in Special Forces. Now, I don't know how many they got, 30, 25, 30?
Yeah. Doing
different things. In the Army, maybe only 20, I don't know, but it's a bunch. But we only had one, and that was a gunfighter then. And he loved special. Whatever unit he was in was the best one there ever was. That's the way he was, and I felt proud to be a part of the fact that I helped him along in that regard.
Yeah.
Now, these remarks that you're going to see right here will reinforce the fact that the kind of guy he was. He was personal. Just look in his eyes when he's talking.
Yeah.
You'll see it.
I didn't know. You never know. How am I going to react? There are lots of people that you would think, if you just looked at him, some big husky guy, tough talking, oh God, he'll be a combat stud. And some few are, but some aren't, and there are lots of little old shrimps. You wouldn't think, soldiers down there could fight their way out of the paper backs that are absolute little tigers. And so I learned pretty quickly, you can't tell by looking at the physical specimen or listening to the tough talk or whatever, that heroism comes in all sizes, shapes, and forms. Having a rifle in your hand's a big equalizer. I'll tell you, pal. He has a rifle machine gun, that's an equalizer. Size doesn't count, the size of the heart's what's count. And I am so proud of all the units I fought with in combat. Look, you got to remember something. It's normal, it's natural to be frightened in combat. If you're not, you don't have all your buttons. There are going to be times when you're cold, you're tired, you're hungry, you're frightened, but you can never let it show. That you got to be an actor, if you will. You can't let the troops see, because they're all sitting there looking at watching you in those circumstances. You just got to put on a mask. You got to have confidence, cheerfulness, and determination to get the job done, and their confidence that it's going to work out and that you're going to take care of it. It's got to show. You never look tired, hungry, apprehensive, doubtful in front of the troops. And the final thing the leader can do is to go make a personal presence on the battlefield.
When he was 18th Airborne Corps, now 18th Airborne Corps was in charge of the 82nd Special Forces at Fort Bragg, and then there's Fort Campbell. It was under 18th Airborne Corps, and I think Fort Lewis at the time was also, I believe. Anyway, it was about 100 and some thousand troops. But he realized, he believed in combat, and he said, it's just a brag now, he said, we're going to do 30 days reverse cycle for Fort Bragg. You might ask, what is that?
Yeah, what is that?
That's going to work at 5 in the evening for 30 days. We're going to learn to work at night because we're going to fight at night. Can you imagine doing that today? But we did it.
What would be the problem today? Pushback?
Well, everybody's going to push back, so you can't do that. It interferes with my daycare and all that. It just won't work. But he he didn't have the issues that we have now. I don't know. I'd be interested in. I wish I think in my mind how he would respond to some of these issues now. But he believed in war fighting, and if we're going to fight a war, we're going to win. He believed in hard reality of training to prepare for the toughest battles, because he was in some of the toughest battles when he was a battalion commander in 101st Airborne Division, Vietnam, when he was a company commander in 31st Division, maybe in Korea, and then later as a brigade commander in the 9th when he was shot down, wounded badly. His General Westmoreland's brother-in-law was a battalion commander. General Westmoreland ran the whole deal. Battalion commander under Hank, and was killed under fighting for Hank.
Wow.
And
well, they saw some combat. Well, you've said before that, he has the 2 Distinguished Service Crosses, but he had, in your words, a fistful of Silver Stars, too.
Yeah, about 6 of them, I guess. And, he put himself into the situation, and that's what leadership is. You don't want to do it for your soldiers. You want them to know that you would if you had to, or that you had done it. Mm-hmm. It makes them want to live up to your standards and greatest respect. But he loved to get in front of the troops and talk to them. And when you see over there where he's talking to the large group there,
yeah,
that's Special Forces. That's almost everybody in Special Forces at the time. He got up there and you see, look, we're going to get a call. That's not the Hitler salute. He was just talking about you guys like this.
Yeah.
This is Hitler. This is not. So we'll clear that up right now.
Oh, yeah. No. That's all right. They could try and cancel this.
They don't. But a lot of our listeners and those who hadn't been in the military would find that some of the things he did was not necessary, but let me tell you, they still talk about it. Combat football. He created that. Created it right there at Fort Bragg when he was at Fort Bragg, and then went to the 82nd. Not the 82nd, the 2nd Division, and formed it up with the 2nd Division, brought it back to Fort Bragg when he was the Corps, and these 100,000 combat football.
What's combat football?
The most rugged thing that I've ever seen. And if you wanted to talk about physical contact, it makes the NFL look like water polo or something. So basically what it is 2 teams, and he required everybody to play. Now you practice all week long, but on Friday, I believe it was Friday, every field that had grass on it, some didn't have grass, they had to be occupied. And he'd fly around in a helicopter to make sure. Now, basically what it is, think about this. The average platoon is about 40. So you had 2 teams with 40, one at the goal line and one at the other goal line. 2 footballs at the center, 50-yard line. The idea is, through whatever way, brute force, tactics, or whatever, is to get the balls on the other guy's side. Both of them. Yeah, you just had 2. And to make it interesting, right? More thinking about it. But when you get 40 guys rushing each other, and the only rule, absolutely only rule, if I remember, is no neck tackling.
Couldn't swing somebody from their neck.
You just couldn't neck tackle.
No referees.
No, I don't think we had referees. No
referees.
But you could do anything. So let's face it, if you weren't a popular company commander or platoon leader, there'd be a lot of cheap shots delivered to you. But I remember one time, and we were in a helicopter, and he was learning to fly, actually. because it's when the Army didn't have a lot of helicopter pilots and general officers, and so he decided he wanted to learn how to fly. So he had an instructor pilot, and I'm in the back. And Hugh and we're flying around, and he looked down. And he says, "I don't think they're playing it like they should." He'd land right over there, and he got out there, and he's standing there, and I said, and he'd give him the, as I say, to come to Jesus, and he'd tell him, "Look, this is combat football, and you're going to play it like combat. In fact, my aide's going to show you how." I'm thinking, whoa, the cheap shot, 80 guys, his aide. Get in there, Drew. And I didn't, you had your boots on. You didn't wear tennis shoes or anything. You used boots and whatever, and I had them on. But I got the football over there, but I come back pretty rugged looking.
I was going to say, how'd it go?
Got back in the helicopter. I was pretty raggedy. And he looked back and says, "Well, Drew, what do you think about that?" I said, "General," I said, "all right, I think we convinced them that 80 guys on top of one is the advantage." I said, "The only advantage I had is they couldn't all get to me." So
sounds fun.
Yeah, but anyway, the folks that grew up in the military around combat football, combat basketball, same way, smaller size, but
I've played some of that.
Floor's a little harder. And but anyway, we'd go to quite a few trips to the hospital to visit some troops that had got broken arms or legs or whatever, and playing combat football, and he'd walk in the room and they'd want to stand up and they got a broken leg.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, they admired him so much. And funny guy, though, strange. I remember one time I said, Hank's sitting around there, I'm going to take him a couple of movies. We must be thinking alike. So I bought 2 DVDs. I mean, I guess it was VCR in those days. Yeah. One was She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. It's about cavalry, John Wayne and all that. Really amazing, nice, good movie. And the other was Scent of a Woman. I said, "Oh, Hank's going to like this." So I brought it in. He says, he walked over the TV. There were 2 movies under the TV. They were the same ones.
Same movies.
So if you go to see him and he says, "You want to watch a movie?" Guess what? It's one of those 2.
Scent of a Woman. What's the other one?
She Wore a Yellow Woman, a ribbon. With John Wayne.
Very good.
And but there were some very good leadership examples in those movies, and that's what he liked. But I just think that we need to get back to that, and I don't know if we're gonna be able to do it. He was an aide to Mark Clark, our older visitors on this program might know who Mark Clark was, but he was senior guy in Korea during the war, and very, very, very gentlemanly type guy. Yeah. And I met him.
Mark Clark, yeah. When Gunfighter was Corps Commander headquarters, he invited General Clark to see. I remember Mark Clark was part of the Bill Crawford story, Double Medal of Honor recipient Bill Crawford, and he. So in our film, I remember that he was leading the troops in World War II.
Yeah, in World War II, yeah,
yep. And
in Korea. But so General Clark was visiting the Gunfighter at Fort Bragg, and we were at the Corps Commander's headquarters. His quarters. And the General Clark was in the back in the kitchen area, and I walked back there. See, the general invited me as a guest, even though I was his aide. He really, he did have a lot of respect, maybe not for me so much, but for the Medal of Honor. And he just was that way. Anyway, I'm standing there talking to General Clark, and General Clark, being he's West Pointer and very, very dignified, he said, "Well, Captain, what class were you?" Assuming that Hank would have a West Point officer as his aide, right? And I said, well, General, I'm a class of 44. And he says, how can that be? Hank is 48. And I said, well, about that time, the General Hank walked in. He said, what are you telling the boss? They could hear this. And General Clark said, well, he said he's the class of 44. He said, Drew, tell him why, what that means. Well, General Clark, I was born there. And you were born at the academy. Oh, well, now he's thinking he's back into the dad must have been a West Pointer, right?
Yeah.
My dad was an enlisted guy training lieutenants to go to war in 1944 at the machine gun range. And when he said, well, what did your dad do there? Thinking that he might be the superintendent or something. And well, he was a cadet, sir. That didn't go over well with Hank. And finally, then I got, because in those days, there was the cadets didn't even date or anything. It was like you were celibate, you just stayed there and studied. But anyway, when I said that and explained it, he said, Hank, you got a pisser here for an aide. I like him.
That's pretty cool.
But anyway,
well,
so I think you're going to, there's a couple of clips of the Gunfighter here that we're very proud to have, and you're gonna that you filmed them and at Fadeaway and maybe another. I don't know if you did it any other place, but our audience is going to be enjoy them, I'm sure.
Throughout his military career, Drew Dix served with and under many of the military's most decorated soldiers, including 3-star General Hank Emerson. As a combat veteran of the Korean War and later in Vietnam, Emerson earned the nickname the Gunfighter. Emerson has received 2 Distinguished Service Crosses, an award second only to the Medal of Honor, 5 Silver Stars, and many others. After his first tour of duty in Vietnam, Drew Dix worked as an aide to Emerson. Another notable soldier under Emerson's direct command was General Colin Powell. On a recent winter day in Montana, the Gunfighter was kind enough to share his thoughts on Drew Dix.
There are some things I'd like to say about Drew Dix that he would never say about himself. He was sent to Vietnam to be a replacement in the 5th Special Forces Group. He went there excited about that, anxious to go do it. He got off the plane. They sent him to some hotel or headquarters downtown. He talked to the civilian and said, well, you're not going to the 5th Group. You're going to a special project. And they described what it was. And so you say to yourself, well, how did that happen? Well, I can tell you how it must have happened. I'm sure the CIA took a hard look at all the records from Fort Bragg, the recent trainees in Special Forces, and he was the very best there was. And at the time, as again depicted in the film, Mr. Monroe was pressured to accept Navy SEALs, who are wonderful soldiers or operatives themselves, but Mr. Monroe said, no, I want a Special Forces soldier. By God, he got the best one there was available, I'll tell you that. That's how it happened. And was he right in his selection? Absolutely. He has to feel pretty good about himself. He must be a pretty good judge of horse flesh and men, that guy Monroe. I don't know you, Monroe, but good work, man. The province chief was devastated by the fact that he was cut off from his family. They were isolated. He was convinced they were all dead, and he lost his whole energy, his whole effectiveness. He was just out of it because he was so distraught that he lost the family, so it's difficult to get much support from them. And of course that led to Drew making a number of trips back and forth, running the gauntlet, if you will. Indeed, something like Somalia must have been getting shot at from both sides in 2 Jeeps and a small other vehicle. And he went back and forth 3 or 4 times. Miraculously, he was wounded somewhat, but not badly. Miraculously, he did this with great success. Early on, for the first few hours, he had the support of the SEAL team. There was a great rapport between the SEAL team members and Drew Dix, and they were anxious to be helping him, and they were effective in helping him. Unfortunately, one of them was killed, shot through the head, and this caused the Navy SEAL commander to make the decision he was going to cut out of there and leave because he had a man killed. And so that left Drew alone without any American support at all. Now you have to keep in mind, this isn't like an American combat operation where we enjoyed great mobility with helicopter support, tremendous firepower support with artillery planned to help us, helicopter gunships, tactical air support. None of that was available to him. And so that makes the excursions he made back and forth into that city all the more marvelous. And the fact is, it turned out there were two whole Viet Cong battalions that had invaded the city. You know, if somebody's such a natural leader, he's setting the example. He's the first man up front. He's a great shot. He's brave, and he used hand signals. But you can command respect. No, I say you can. An extraordinary individual like Drew Dix could command respect because of this tremendous leadership, natural ability, in particular ability to work with mercenary personnel that didn't even have the language. And of course, they all idolized him, followed him anywhere. And he was able to bring this off back and forth and back and forth. And then finally, he decided to clean out the town and went from building to building with this force, and eventually entered an auditorium where he captured Viet Cong general. Seldom happened in the whole war, and a valuable source of information. And then later, he went to the extreme top floor of about a 7-story building and cleaned it out one floor after the other, and then finally retrieved the province chief's wife and children, brought them back to the base area. The province chief was so relieved that his family had been freed that he immediately snapped out of it and came to life and began to issue orders and get support from more Vietnamese forces, and that effectively ended the battle and lay shattered 2 Viet Cong battalions. Now, this is economy of force in the best sense of the word. People like to say, rightly so, in the special operations community, this is force multiplier. This is saying one individual with a few indigenous forces, he's multiplied the force, but we've only committed 1 American, but he's equivalent of the size of an American unit. And so that made these very efficient operations. He went to great lengths to see if there's some way that he could assure the safety of those 13 Chinese Noongs that had worked for him as the thing began to crumble over there, knowing that they'd be targeted by the enemy. They had to be marked men, that they had worked with Drew and the CIA, and they'd all get annihilated, or they all get slaughtered. And so there's an axiom in the Army that you take care of your men. There's an axiom in the Army you don't leave dead and wounded on the battlefield, and that you make sure that there's any way possible to take care of everyone and get them all home. And the fact is, these were part of our effort in Vietnam. They'd served us loyally and well. Drew went to great personal, financial debt in order to sponsor getting those 13 people all over here in the United States, helped some get started in college in this country, got them jobs, and that's taking care of your men in the finest sense of the word. And you have to, that gets beyond language barriers or anything like that. If you've ever been around Drew, and in the film depicted as Nego, and whether you can understand his use of the English or not, you can damn well see what respect he had for Drew as a man, as a brave man, as a man who took care of his troops, and a man who was adored by his troops. And I can tell you this, I encouraged him on another tour to go back to Vietnam, to the 101st Airborne, to my old outfit, the 2nd Battalion, 502nd Parachute Infantry. He did that, commanded a rifle company there with great distinction. I tell you, in today's Army, Drew Dix would have risen to general officer status. Never had envy for the people that have the Medal of Honor, nothing but the most respect. This medal is not given lightly. It is scrutinized so carefully, requiring so much documentation. Certainly there are probably a few people that deserve the Medal of Honor that don't get it. Somebody in watching didn't see or didn't get written up well, but that still doesn't affect the fact the people that did get it all damn well deserved it. I've always been a great admirer of the recipients of the Medal of Honor.
Before we end the show, tell us why the ranch was named Fadeaway.
You know, he had a little plaque on this little walkway that went out over the rocks. Beautiful lake, remember? And he firmly believed that you do your time in the military, and especially general officers, that you soldier and as long as you can, and then you retire and fade away. And there's a poem, The Fiddler's Green, that he referred to on that. And that's why I wonder what he would be saying right now with this a little bit of controversy on the DEI and everything. I don't know whether he would just say, oh, that's their job now, or whether he would tune in. I would tell you right now, if I was sitting with him having a scotch, that he'd be telling me what is wrong with it.
Yeah.
But whether he would actually do something, I don't know. And I also think that's why we have some of this problem in the military, is even the general officers that know better, flag officers, they're leaving it to the current regime. It's their duty, their job. Mm-hmm. But the DEI was so powerful that the problem is we recruited people with those special interests from the very beginning, trained them in the academies or in colleges or off the streets, and now they're in leadership. That's all they know is individuality of their special interests. And by God, in the military, you can't be an individual. There's time on the battlefield where individually you have to perform, but you do it as part of a team. And to do otherwise is pure bad behavior. And just remember, tolerance is a character flaw.
Just because no one knows doesn't mean it isn't true.